All right, thank you all for coming. Feel free, as we're kind of talking and presenting, just to get more food. If you want more kombucha, sodas, just help yourself. As you know, this is our wrap-up for our summer curriculum, and we've done our unpacking the new standards. We've got our curriculum maps, but now it's time to really think about how we're going to teach the kids. What is it going to look like in our English classrooms when we actually start trying to build their skills and develop lesson plans to go along with the unit plans. So this is what I landed on after considering some problems that we're going to start with. So basically, let's just kind of look at my perception of the state of not just Cedar, but kind of education in general. And so these are some things I identified. Did any of those look familiar to y'all? Have y'all experienced any of that?
Yeah. All of that.
All of that, yeah. So I started thinking, okay, we got literacy problems, but it's really these unlevel and collaborative classes where I struggle. And I feel like I not only have learned enough in this program, but I already knew a good bit about how to teach kids. And I'm like, constantly every year, like what's not clicking, why is it not working? And so I started thinking about other factors that might contribute and some of the complications of collaborative classrooms. I had a co-teacher last semester who had, he worked with 2 different English teachers and 1 social studies teacher. And so that's kind of the way that our school does it. It's just really random. You have different co-teachers throughout a day. You have co-teachers work with different teachers. And so the collaborative teachers also become like multi-assistants for our school. They get pulled for any and everything. I had some issues with that this year. And, another thing about when co-teachers and are all interacting, it's like, how do we arrange it so that everybody has a role, everybody has a job? And, of course, especially with special ed, ESOL students don't mind being identified as much, but if you're going to be delivering special instruction or you're going to be able working with kids, you got to do it in a way with special ed kids that you maintain their confidentiality. But it's actually, I'm going to talk about later in the deck that a lot of times this specially designed instruction, or SDI or SI it's sometimes called, is required by IDEA, and it doesn't happen a lot. So we've got tons of different ability levels. You guys know this, but this was something that surprised me. Now, this doesn't just apply to collaborative teachers, but it does seem like it's more likely for a teacher to get hired in a collaborative position without being certified than in a content area. So 22% of the teachers at our school in the 23-24 year, according to the governor's honors, the governor's office of student achievement, where you find CCRPI and all that, held an emergency or provisional license. That is almost 1/4 of the teachers at our school. So I have realized that most of my ESOL teachers, it seems like they tend to have more certification and they tend to have more of a skill set. The special ed teachers that I work with, a lot of them tend to be coaches, a lot of them tend to be hired for something else and then they fill this role. And they don't tend to have a lot of instructional background. So that's kind of the backdrop we're working with. And of course, does this look familiar to anyone? All right. I started thinking about all of the behaviors, the learning, the legit learning disabilities that some students have, but also just the difficulties, even if they don't have diagnosed disabilities. A lot of students struggle with reading and writing, and that's what we all do, and so it's pretty challenging. Now, going into other things, whenever we're starting off a new year, it seems like maybe people on Silk know, but to the regular teacher, it just seems like we're doing what now? What about this other thing? And so we're constantly changing things up, things that are non-negotiable one year, never mentioned again. The expectations, priorities of instructional coaches. I don't think I've done the same thing in a PLC that was mandatory 2 years in a row yet. So we've got all this pressure to not only raise test scores, but to pass students, to graduate them all, or to at least keep graduating them in a way that improves our graduation rate. And so those things can sometimes not be compatible. And the final thing that I'll mention is this narrative about how public schools and teachers are failing. All right, so this is one of my favorite sources that I discovered by Costigan, and he confirmed a lot of the things that I feel about education. But he said that anybody that's part of it and outside of it would think that this is a chaotic system that we have and everything is just changing and nobody knows what's going on. But he claims it's actually intentionally designed to be that way, and it's executed with fidelity through a hierarchy which descends not just from the most powerful people in education, but the most powerful forces in our society, such as CEOs and politicians and things like that. And so I'm not going to read everything to you. I see y'all are good students as well as good teachers, and you're already reading this stuff. So I'm just going to kind of mention some of the highlights in each slide. So as you know, I'll mention things like Race to the Top later, but the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they have a huge amount of control over what happens in education and how, how we get paid sometimes. I know that in Georgia, every year that they've talked about the pay for performance, it's falling through because they can't get enough teachers. But there are all kinds of things in that Race to the Top money. If the state accepted it, you're on the hook for all these things that billionaires, philanthropists came up with as, things that they wanted to happen in education. And so he goes on to say that, and I do love this one, I'm going to read it. The political and economic elites who advocate, fund, and politically implement educational reforms have a coherent mythology that bears upon the urban student, teachers, and beginning teacher participants in this study. Their mythology maintains schools are failing, students are unchallenged, the curriculum is watered down, teachers need to be forced into high standards by authorities, neoliberal ideology including privatization and competition should be applied to schooling. Rigorous testing and strict accountability to authorities raises academic achievement. Social and economic realities such as poverty are irrelevant to student achievement and can be improved by a curriculum that develops grit. The purpose of schooling is primarily to enhance personal economic advancement, and without schools with rigorous standards, our national economy is in jeopardy. Those who are critical of this mythology have documented that this is a manufactured crisis which has changed public schooling in harmful ways. So the same people that are propagating this mythology are benefiting from this state of crisis. Testing companies, we're buying new curriculums like crazy, new programs, new software. So this is all kind of background and it shouldn't be unfamiliar to you, but if you have any questions about anything, just let me know. All right, so this was another, I was looking at, primarily, even in my ESOL classes, I can get more buy-in with students who are ESOL. I struggle the most with students who are Black, and this source specifically was combating I Hate This Stupid Book, Black Males in Critical Literacy. And maybe 10 years ago that might have been true, but I find that now, the struggle seems to be the same across genders. But it still seems to be that the least connected to education and how that education is going to impact their future tend to be the Black students in my classroom who come from poverty and have deficits and things like that. So this basically says that all of this framework that's being created by all these forces, these accountability measures, these reforms, they fail to consider how young Black men live and learn, and the narrow focus on standard English and text complexity could be interpreted in such a way that literacy classroom practices return to a back-to-basics approach that could ignore students' personal and cultural histories. And so this becomes and I haven't, when I first started teaching, I heard a lot about culturally responsive teaching. Unless I'm reading about it on my own, I don't hear about that much in PL. It's all about data and how to get results. And teacher is going to be, you're going to have to teach them how to interact with other adults and how to interact with students that they might not have planned for. And so it's another ripple in my research that I considered. And obviously we all know that when they come to us, they have lots of great ideas. They are planning for themselves. They're planning for the students they want. They have these great lesson plans that you might see in the Dead Poets Society. But then they meet our students at Cedar Shoals, and it just breaks their little hearts. And it's hard to watch, but it's also hard to know how to support them because they watch me fail for a semester. And they don't understand that that's the way it is. And so I try to wrap into the semester a practicum modeling strategies which kind of work, but when our students, it's like things that kind of work just kind of work. And so getting them to understand what it's actually like and to not have that first week like crestfallen, just anxiety, and really just even more I'd say even existential crisis when they start teaching. Okay, so here are the research questions. We'll go over these at the end, and I basically will talk about how the answers that I came up with, but I wanted to explore how can I better utilize SPED and ESOL co-teachers. How can I more effectively support ELA teacher candidates through all the many struggles that we have? How can I improve student engagement among reluctant readers and writers? The benefits and drawbacks of collaborative literacy strategies, which is what I landed on as maybe the best way that I could try to improve engagement. Which reading and writing strategies are most appropriate? Ended up coming up with three that I really liked, and they're very similar. Just the application is a little different. And then how to design groups to work best in our classrooms. So I thought about restructuring classrooms. I have done from the beginning of the year sometimes groups. I've sometimes start in rows. I usually do some kind of group, but usually it's just people sitting together. It hasn't been intentional, like roles, and I've kind of moved away from some of that I decided to get back to this semester. All right, so here's some of the benefits that we're going to talk about in some of the research. And like I said, I'm going to go through some of that quickly. Just slow me down if you have any questions. But all adults in a room simultaneously have something to do with groups. If you're working with groups, everybody has something to do. If you are looking at a whole class row situation, you got one person teaching and then a co-teacher and myself kind of on the skirting around the room trying to figure out what to do. And that's not necessarily effective for the students or for the student teacher. So ideally, students can support each other during these sessions. Peer accountability might be more effective than teacher pressure. And so trying to increase this buy-in and engagement. And of course, we are going to talk about different ways to group. You've got a lot of flexibility with how to do that. So this is one of the things that I don't think this is going to come as any surprise. But in a pretty recent study that looked at between 2018, 2023, 19 studies, basically found that although it's been discouraged for as long as I can remember since it started, that across the nation, that's what's pretty much happening with co-teaching is whole group instruction with one teach, one assist. And so very little difference in structure between co-taught classes and classes with only a content teacher. So a lot of the research I came across is, well, why are we even doing it? Is it a compliance thing that's not serving the kids? If we are supposed to be serving the kids, then shouldn't we feel a responsibility to do it differently?
And I don't know if this is appropriate, but like one of the things I feel like that's come up a lot in the last few years is having more adults in the classroom is better for kids and not necessarily. So that brings that, that's interesting.
Yeah, and you know, I had a classroom once, they decided that 3 adults would be better, and they would give me 36 kids and we would split up into 3 groups, and it was horrible. I think maybe just one co-teacher would have been fun, but they had a co-teacher that they didn't trust as a regular teacher and they didn't trust as a co-teacher, and they said they were only going to put that person in a room with 2 other adults. And I had basically an adult in my room that became my biggest behavior problem. So little evidence of specially designed instruction. Different sources that I use. One called it SDI, another called it SI, and specialized instruction would be SI, but it's all the same thing. It comes from language and IDEA, but the federal law doesn't actually tell what it is and what it looks like and how to do it. So it's just open to interpretation, but they basically said what it's not. So accommodations are not specially designed instruction. Differentiation is not specially designed instruction. And when we think about it, that's pretty much the 2 things that we think of. If you asked most of my co-teachers who are special ed what their role is, they would tell me to make sure kids get their accommodations and to make sure that lessons are differentiated. And so basically they could find no evidence besides those 2 things, which don't count as SDI, that there's no evidence that SDI was occurring in any of those classrooms. And so I felt that it was important. It's really hard to balance working with different adults throughout the day. So I decided to take more of a role this year with facilitating conversations between my student teacher and co-teacher, doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff, explaining to the co-teacher what was happening, and then having just little huddles at the end of class. It's really all we could do because none of us had planning together. And so a lot of, and you know, this is research, but my student teacher actually told me that she wasn't comfortable. She's like, I don't know what to do with the kids that can't speak English. I'm just gonna let, you know, Melnick deal with them. And I tried to explain to her that we're absolutely responsible for all the kids, that, you know, there have been situations. I know, Tara, you have taught a class all by yourself because you had the ESOL.
Even with newcomers, yeah.
Yeah.
We've had some this year, yeah.
Yeah, and so I told her that, you know, I tried to make it positive. I don't know if any of y'all remember Musa, but when he came in the 9th grade, he could not speak a single word of English. And he was panicked. And our good friend Caroline was his only contact, lifeline, because she was the only person that spoke French in the building. And so when I taught him in the 11th grade, he had a strong accent, but he was fluent. He was one of my best students. He was doing higher level research, and I forget which college he went to, but he got an international business degree. He knows 9 languages. And Perla is a student that I taught this year in 10th grade. And my daughter was on the soccer team with her, and you know, I talked about Perla being in my class. She was like, oh, she doesn't speak English. And I spoke to her, and she speaks really good English now. And when Finn was on the team with her last as a freshman, she could not speak any. And so in less than a year, this child has incorporated a new language. And so I tried to explain to her that it's not as scary as, they might not understand everything you say, but you know, all of us working together and interacting with them, and the more they hear English, the more they're going to pick it up. And there's not a lot of pressure. It's not like those teachers that have those kids had some magic playbook. The kids just picked it up through instruction. So we are also thinking about how things are, how we can use groups to support all of these things we're talking about. All kinds of variety of co-teaching models can be reached and are applicable to group work and small groups, whether they're stations, small groups, you know, parallel teaching, all kinds of things you can do by breaking the class up. And so, and in groups, it's a lot easier for the any teacher to deal with 4 people rather than, you know, every individual at a time. But what we found was that my ESOL co-teacher, Ms. Melnick, was able to kind of assign groups, and even though we broke students up and they weren't all together, we made sure that every kid that needed it had a Spanish-speaking, English-speaking, Spanish-speaking peer, and she was able to move around.
And not given the resources of time and space for teachers to work together to be intentional with their co-teaching, with their co-teachers, with you know, anything, right? Like you can't just throw 3 people in a room and expect it to go well.
Yeah, every day felt like an audible, even though we had lesson plans we were both working from. It's very different, as you know, if you know we share a lot. I look at something another teacher did, and it really, like, sometimes I'm like, I don't quite understand what's happening here. Like, it's almost like you need to see it sometimes. Sometimes Once you look at activities, it's more clear, but just looking at the lesson plan grid, it's sometimes hard to just know what's happening, even if we're all looking at the same document. And yeah, and that's been my experience. I have not had planning with a co-teacher, I don't think, in 5 years.
Yeah.
Do you think they'll ever prioritize the building of team, teaching teams? Because it seems like.
Not currently, because
Yeah.
even, I mean,
It's-
we
it's
specifically,
insane.
I've had co-teachers we have both requested to work together because we know we can work well together, and that has not been, they haven't done it. So, I mean, the question about whether this seems untrue or unfamiliar, I think everything you said is very familiar and like validating in some kind of way. And it's so multi-layered because there's, the issue of not having the same planning, there's the issue of having co-teachers who often have no experience or credentials to do the job. And then even I like to put my classes in groups, and I try to group them intentionally, but then you have to be so you have to stay on it, because it's easy just to kind of okay, sit wherever or whatever, you guys, and then it just kind of falls
The
apart.
12th time.
Can I sit over there?
Yeah.
Fine.
Right. Or you group them thinking okay, this is a good group with different levels and whatever, and then you realize their personalities are not going to work well together, and so then you have to switch it. And so I think it takes a lot of intentionality and a lot of consistency to make that happen.
Have you found since the pandemic, finding students to help other students has been harder? You said.
Yeah, it's in here.
Yeah.
It's a problem, and it has been a struggle, trying to implement this last semester. And I do want to just go ahead and say that, when I took this course, it's been broken up into 2 courses now. And so when I took it, you had to do the lit review and design the project and implement the project and do this paper and everything, all in one semester. And so I ended up, and I had a student teacher, and I couldn't just dictate. I collaborated with her, and she was open to some of my ideas, but basically I almost had to wait to do the full project when she was winding her student teaching down. So we're talking about the last 5 weeks of school, which are not necessarily the best 5 weeks. Any other questions?
I think another factor is the turnover that we have in co-teachers too, which comes with the provisional licensing part as well, and the movement within different subject areas.
Yeah.
You might be co-teaching biology one year and math the next. That's
Well, and to me that tells me whoever's designing the schedule, placing people in their positions, don't see co-teachers as needing to have content knowledge.
Right.
But if you want, I think every co-teacher I talk to says they have to spend significant time learning the material.
Yeah.
So content knowledge is an important part of it.
And then they go to a different side.
Yeah, to do that.
Well, and
It
they-
feels like their assignments are just an afterthought.
Yeah.
We need to
They
have this
often
many
have
people.
3
Okay, let's
preps,
go, go, go.
and they're often across departments. So it's not just 3 different ELA classes. It's biology, social studies, and ELA. That's
And
very
how-
common.
If you really believe these are co-teachers, you wouldn't do that.
Right.
That doesn't even make sense.
Mhm.
So if they
And it's
don't want an
stressful for
assistant,
people that really
Right,
want
it
to do
feels
well.
brand compliance,
You
we have to
hear
have
that
a teacher
word
in here.
stress. And it makes me think of this chaos that I'm very interested in the research you did with this is it that they design, the environment's designed to be chaotic?
Yes, and that it's designed to support the mythology that public schools are failing and failing worse, and something is happening in the schools that
So you have to
It's-
say,
and so that you have to look to the Koch brothers for for them to swoop in.
Propaganda.
Yeah. And so really as we move on, I was thinking about co-teachers, and I had one co-teacher who a nice guy, but didn't really have the background knowledge, didn't seem to have any training at all. And, you know, I got observed, and one of the feedback points was that I needed to give more explicit instructions to my co-teacher on what he should be doing. And I was like, look, you know, we don't have time to talk. I give him the lesson plans. I give him a rundown before class. I make suggestions. And especially when we were doing the group work, I told him we're all going to be moving around with groups, but I would look up at the front, he'd be sitting up there on his phone.
And it seems like shouldn't the feedback actually be to him that, hey, you should be asking this person
But
questions?
they actually told me it was my responsibility, since he was a second-year teacher, I was a veteran, that I was supposed to train him to do his job. And I'm like, when am I going to train him? And how is this suddenly my responsibility? Isn't that like a special ed department? Like,
Yeah, he has teacher
role?
in his name.
Yeah.
It says teacher.
And so it's just another one of those things that gets thrown on us.
I found the most successful teaching experiences aren't really based on instruction at all. It's just a mesh with your personalities.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and I've had great, like, you know, you talk about the model of like one teaching and one assisting. I've had it work where how it's supposed to work, where, you know, this person would just interrupt me when he felt like it, I would interrupt him, like it was just that, you know, that kind of click thing. So, and I've had that more than just with one person, and it seems more like a personality kind of
Oh yeah.
a personality fix more than like instructional or academic. You can't make it work. I mean, sometimes you have to try to make it work, but
Well, and that's why people should be able to give feedback on the schedule. and
Right.
schedule it.
Request
I mean,
people.
Well,
Yeah,
Because when it
that's-
works, it's like magic.
right.
Yeah.
But when it works, you never see it again.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we worked great together.
I know.
And then never
Bye-bye.
to be seen again
Yeah.
because they figure, oh, it worked. They're both
Oh.
strong.
They're both strong,
Let's pair
split
them
up.
with,
Yeah.
yeah. And, you know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh, go ahead. And then we'll,
I was wondering if that's something that's changed over time, because I feel like when I first started 10 years ago, there was pairs that had been working together forever,
Yeah.
but you don't really see that anymore.
I think
You
that
have
kind of
to-
comes with the
You have to
turnover.
fight
The
for
admin
it.
turnover
yeah.
too.
And-
Yeah.
Yeah, both.
Depending on the admin, they decide who gets paired up.
So I love the discussion, but we're gonna have different points, but I value y'all's time, and so I'm gonna keep going here. Now we're gonna get into some of the strategies I researched. So how many people have used reciprocal teaching before? Yeah, it was a thing.
That's where you have a kid teach their partner.
Kinda, but they all, basically they're these Fab Four skills. One kid gets the role of predicting, one clarify, one question, summarize. And you have to teach what the roles look like. But basically, they're supposed to go through and they do a thing. They each have a task that's different, and you break up. And it ended up being my favorite strategies are the ones like this, and there's one that's similar that's called questioning the author. That's more appropriate to nonfiction, especially persuasion, argumentative. But it's kind of a metacognitive strategy where you are given a role and you have to learn to do the things that good students or good readers do all the time. And we're basically trying to teach them what it is you do or should be doing each time you read, and it works best when you break a text into small chunks. So the first time I ever really encountered this, I know Brian will remember Patty McCorder, but she, as a department head, used to, I think we met like every week, it felt like, and we would have assignments, and we would have to each take a different strategy, and we would have to come back in our departments, and this was when we had autonomy to do what we wanted as a department and not just, you know, get told what to do. And I chose this one. And so we're talking maybe 20 years ago, and I really liked it, and the research has held up for decades that this promise of 0.74 or almost 2 years of growth in 1 year, if you are consistently using reciprocal teaching as a small group literacy building tool. And so that's one that I looked at. Self-regulated learning is super broad. It's metacognition, and it basically is about goal setting, monitoring progress, and reflecting, and teaching students to establish what they want to learn, how they know they're learning or whether they're learning, and then reflection at the end. So once again, just teaching core skills that are good for readers. And let me make sure. Yeah, and here's the problem. All the research basically said that it wasn't just teaching the kids the skills. It also was dependent on their motivation to use the skills.
Yeah.
So once again, I'm using these strategies to try to motivate kids to engage them more, but then I have to motivate them to do the strategy,
Right,
which will
yeah.
motivate them. All right, so CSR is basically reciprocal teaching, but they have to write down for some accountability. Okay, so the question in the author strategy, I really like this one because, I found, I'm going to talk about this later, but a lot of my students, when they read any article, they assume it's true. The teacher gave it to me, and I love to blow that paradigm out of the water by, giving them a piece of satire from The Onion, and just watch what happens. I usually only have one or two students in the room that pick up that The Onion is not real. The Abortionplex was one of my favorite articles, and it's a picture of a airport, and it talks about when you go for your abortion, you can go to a variety of nightclubs where you can get drinks because it doesn't matter anyway, and you can float down the lazy river with your drink, and students were just like, this is crazy. And so this is a very generic strategy that gets them, and we'll look at some of the questions that you have a lot of freedom for the generic questions, but you're basically getting them to say, what's the author saying? How do I feel about this? How well supported is this? To try to reason through whether the point of view is valid or not, and whether it's supported. And so this study had pre-test and post-test results that showed 10% increases in all three of these areas: word comprehension, passage comprehension, and reading comprehension. And so my big thing about it, though, is this, the fact that we're in a post-truth society, and you can just, kids, there's no telling what they're going to see. Not only fake news, but we have AI-generated images, AI-generated videos. It's hard to get students to really think and critically about everything they read, and this is a good strategy to force them to do that. All right, so here are the questions, the most basic ones. What's the author trying to tell us? How do you feel personally? Trying to get them to have an opinion about, instead of just agreeing with the author, is important. And I realized that was the biggest problem that I ended up coming up with. They agreed with opposing viewpoints. I picked two articles with opposing viewpoints, and they would agree with both, and depending on which one they were reading at the time. And I had to remind them, well, that's not what you said yesterday. So,
Interesting.
yeah, and has anybody heard of the Notice and Note literary sign post?
Yes.
Okay, so I actually like these a lot. I don't know, I think I am going to implement them at the beginning of the year, but basically, they're symbolic and archetypal attributes. 6 signposts basically can be applied to any work of fiction, a children's book, a novel, a short story, and it really was interesting to see students use these strategies and look at it in a different way. I really liked it, but it was very time consuming. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over the strategies. I'm going to quickly show them to you. But this is what we're trying to do when we use them. We're trying to instill some reading habits and shape a pattern of reading behavior. We want to teach our students to be alert for certain features as they read, to take responsibility themselves for pausing and reflecting when they spot them, and to own and ask a few potentially powerful questions at those moments, and to be willing to share and revise their thoughts in responsible conversation with others. And so, instead of just giving students questions all the time, having them look for the signpost opens it up and it's a little bit more abstract. And so I'm going to run through quickly, and each of the signposts has a little sign over here, and then up here kind of defines what we're talking about. Contrasts and contradictions. You've introduced to a character, and suddenly the character says or does something that seems opposite to what you know about them. Why is that happening? And so you can have a series of questions for that, but basically, why is the character doing that? What does it show us? What does it mean for us as a reader when we see this thing happening? Same thing with the aha moment. When I started I used a children's book to kind of model this, and every single one of them was in there, and like a 15-page book. And so it was a really easy way to help them see that, no, these things are in here. There's going to be times when characters realize something. How is this going to change the storyline once the character has an aha moment? And tough questions. Once I saw this, I started thinking about how many times in our readings we come up with characters that are, having conversations in their head, asking sometimes with other characters. What does these questions make us think about as readers? And words of the wiser, where we get advice from other characters. Maybe they're older, maybe they're wiser, but sometimes the advice is not always great. But it is a trope that appears in all of these in fiction throughout. Okay, again and again. When things are repeated, patterns are repeated, they're reinforcing this pattern in our head that we're supposed to be thinking about. So let's think about it. And helping kids, instead of just saying to them, this happened, and this happened, why do you think it's happening? Trying to make them do the work with some structure is really helping them build the mental processes in their brains to be able to apply this in the future to reading outside of our classes. And then we've got the memory moment. Might be a flashback. It could be any number of, remembering something. But when characters think about something from the past, why are they doing that? What's important about that memory that we needed to go back in time for? Okay, so phase 1, basically we used The Terrible Things by Eve Bunning. Has anybody used that before? All right, it's allegory of the Holocaust, and it's really, really effective for these because it's a short book, it's got pictures, and I actually tell them when we're going to do story time, and I actually go through the book, and I model the think alouds, the various signposts, like 2 of them, and then I started pointing it out. Oh, that looks like so-and-so. What do y'all think? And tried to invite them to do some of that work as I modeled each of the signpost strategies. And then We had group discussions based on text or specific examples that I provided. And I use student-selected groups. I almost said this earlier. I do think student-selected groups are appropriate sometimes because there's so much drama among teens that sometimes when we do our best to put kids together, we might just be creating a bigger problem without knowing it. And so we're going to see that that is not always the case. I had to change things up. But we started with student-selected groups, and we tried to buy in on that interest of, oh, I'm with my friends, he's letting us work together. And then we just figured that we would step in and work with the groups that needed more support. And we realized that, you can see how this is going to go. Students who were already doing well sought each other out. Students who weren't doing anything sought each other out. Birds of a feather. All right, so here's an example of a signpost prompt, and I would find something in the text, and all they would have to do in groups is talk about why it's important. And there's another one. I found that it added a dimension to the discussion that they did have better discussions. And I was like, okay, this is actually going really well. And so when we got to the point that it kind of broke down when they had to find the examples themselves. When I stopped providing them, they were unable to apply it, and we'll talk about that more later. But I used this slide here whenever we talked about the signposts and they were supposed to be looking for them. I would have this on the board, and I use independent reading to reinforce this. And so I would put this up every time we did independent reading, and then they had a little reflection where they were supposed to look for the signpost, and if they couldn't find one, I had some other options, but I really encouraged them to look for the signpost in their own reading as we were also doing this in the school reading. So phase 2 came around the fact that I had a couple of groups, mostly one class, and we just decided to shake it up for both classes. But I had a third period class that was just really, really tough, and a lot of kids until the end. They ended up with a 70% pass rate, but I had a less than 50% pass rate for most of the class. And we had to go to groups of 3 instead of 4, and we had to assign it. And we found that both configurations were good for the ESOL kids. Melnick had more access to them. We were both able to check in with them and know what was going on. But and actually my students with disabilities responded well, but it was just the students that didn't typically have a disability, but behavior problems, lack of wanting to do it, lack of motivation. It ended up being, I spent a lot of time with those groups just begging them to do it and trying to get them to apply the strategies. So this was when we got to Persepolis, and we started using all of these. I would get was kind of the go-to. All right, so as we have I don't want to take too much of your time, so I'm just going to blow through a lot of this. Just let me know, I've talked about questioning the author. We've looked at the questions. Here are samples. I wanted you to see how short I made the sections. And there were only 3 sections in this one, so we're talking about 4 to 5 tiny paragraphs. Give them chunks and have them process these same questions over and over again. And the idea is that the more they process these generic questions, the more they can remember to ask themselves those same questions when they read, and hopefully apply themselves outside of our classes. And this is the second one. Again, 4 to 5 paragraphs is about all I was asking them to do. I had a rationale for them to look at each time we did it. And the culminating activity was that they looked at 2 different articles with different opinions, opposing viewpoints, and they had to decide which one they agreed with, and boy, that was rough. They did not do as well on this as they did on the theme C-seats. They really struggled. Some just summarized, some could not get past the obvious. Well, Trump isn't Hitler. Trump didn't kill anybody. Like, very, very broad, kind of, well, yeah, you can't, we shouldn't compare them because
Literally.
yeah, they literally are different. And so that was something I realized that all of these skills, you really can't do it in 5 weeks. It's something that you have to really build into your curriculum over the entire year or semester.
Or it's
Years.
Yeah, it's a work of a lifetime, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like these things, the notice and note signposts, and a lot of these strategies, literally, I found on a site that they are being used in elementary, middle, and high school. So it really is a lifetime process. So anything we can do to kind of help with that, it does have benefits. So it was a little rough trying to look at the results because I had my 3rd period, I think I had like 11 kids that I could not get to take all 3 of the common lit assessment. But the data results did show that, 65% of students who took all 3 had higher growth in the post-treatment than the pre-treatment. So I started about halfway through the semester. We had the pre-assessment, and then midway before I started introducing any of these strategies, before I even talked about them, we gave the midpoint. And then after I introduced the strategies and we practiced them, I gave the post-assessment, and it did show promising growth. So another thing, I was surprised by myself. Now, I don't know how much stock to put in it. I don't know how they calculate reading level, and in Common Lit, they don't actually give you lexiles. They just say these kids are below and these kids met, or they're at. So I don't know what that means, but if you look at the number of students on grade level at the midpoint, it's 3 versus the number at the post-assessment, 7, 1, 2, 3, 8, 0, 3, 2, and then 3. There were 9 kids in this class, or in this roster, but it was often because of attendance with ESL students. It was hard to get them to take all 3.
Second semester is tricky.
Yes. Okay, so the conclusions. All 16 students in my 2nd period demonstrated some amount of growth. We're talking average of 20 points growth per student. 11 students in my 3rd period demonstrated some amount of growth, and 12 students refused to complete all 3, which was, I had 23 kids, so it was more than half. But even with that, I factored those kids into it, and still there's an average of 12.5 points growth. So I do think that there's stuff here that are positive to look at. And I know I get tired of standing at the front of the room and talking to an entire group. And I did find that it really did free me up to have, to be able to move around and have other people moving around and to have every person engaged. And yes, I did have to get my co-teacher that liked to be on his phone. I had to remind him to re-engage several times, but yes, that's part of my responsibility. Now, as you look at these, if you have questions, let me know. We're pretty much at the end here, and so if you want to start asking questions, please do. I do want to hear your comments at the end. As we go through the questions, I'm not going to give you all the results, but basically, I did find that, like I said, it was more helpful Melnick, Ms. Melnick does not talk a whole lot, never complains, but actually came to me and was like, this is working so much better. I am able to get around to all the kids. You know, before she didn't want to interrupt, so if it was whole group instruction, she was waiting. And so now having them in groups really allowed us all to have more interaction with those students who needed the most help, and we could give them different levels of support that as they needed it. So, you know, I've got to really make sure that I model this and incorporate it the first semester, because that's the only way they're going to get a lot of this stuff. They're not being taught how to teach kids who can't read, kids who don't want to read, kids who refuse, and all that. They come with theoretical background, and we have to kind of navigate them down the path. So more opportunities to really get feedback from co-teachers about how things was going with individual students was helpful. And we were all equal partners. And my student teacher was terrified when I suggested this at first, because the idea of groups sounded like chaos to her. But instantly, the first day, she was like, oh my God, this is so much better, because there were 2 other people doing the exact same thing she was doing, rather than us sitting staring at her, watching her teach.
Yeah. Oh.
And so, you know, I think that there was more support. I talked about doing this from the very beginning, trying to do anything the last 5 weeks of school, second semester. Not ideal situation there, not ideal circumstances. So, you know, the more supported and connected students feel in an environment, the more confident they're going to be. That goes back to community building, and groups can also be a good way to kind of deliver community building throughout the school year. Okay, so you can look at the benefits and drawbacks. There's pretty much 50-50. I didn't think that it was a failure, but all of the things that make our students challenging to work with just made this challenging as well. So do you have any questions as you look on your own about benefits, drawbacks, or any questions about anything we've gone through?
When you did your intentional grouping, was it thinking of ESOL, was there like a Spanish English speaker, a straight up English speaker, an English struggler? Was it a heterogeneous group like that?
Yeah, it was definitely because there 9 of 23 kids were on that roster, the ESOL roster, and so made sure that every kid that was, we had quite a few, I think like 5 newcomers who, you know, Perla was the exceptional case. She really, you know, used all like Google Translate, and she used tools constantly on her own to navigate. But she worked with a student who, like the sweetest student, Cecilia, who would come into my class and say, hello, and how are you? And we would have a simple conversation, but if I went off script, she didn't know what I was saying. And so Perla took her under her wing, really without me asking her to. I did ask once we divided them up in groups, you're going to need to help so-and-so. But that was already happening with Perla and Cecilia anyway. And, you know, I pointed that out to my student teacher, like, look, these kids have been through it. Any of these kids that have come here and have struggled, they're going to help another kid that struggles. And so it's not like it's all on us. Any other questions about maybe the drawbacks or things that I realize we're still problematic?
Okay, so your 3 strategies, if you could only do one, If say I'm a new teacher, I can only learn one, which one would you recommend?
Reciprocal teaching and questioning the author, because they're pretty much the same thing. It's like reciprocal teaching is more appropriate. Well, it's really can work with anything. So reciprocal teaching. But I really like the structure of questioning the author specifically for persuasion. So it's easily modifiable and it's easily linked to reciprocal teaching. So those two are not like, you wouldn't be teaching a whole new process. The notice and note signposts, I feel like offer the most potential, but they were a bear. It took like constant reinforcement. And I'm not gonna lie, the kids that got it, it really helped them, but only a few really got it. So it took so much time too.
Mm-hmm.
So I
But
would
you
say
think that if you like front,
We're doing this for nonfiction, we're doing this for fiction.
because you also never know what works when you're doing
My
content.
experience with the notice and note. So like did you have them annotate the text with symbols also?
With symbols, no. I had them like
It's kind of like they're recording
it was
somewhere else, yeah.
really the only thing we got to was like using it as a group discussions.
Okay.
But I actually had some ideas about like, what would I do again? But I think we talked about this one, like you had the question about what was best. One thing I wanted to mention was I do think that at the beginning of the year, like having groups and kind of a random seating chart, and just it's not like student selected, but it's also not like a lot of teacher involvement. They don't feel targeted or placed.
Right.
And I'm going to try that from the very beginning, and instead of just like easing into groups, I'm just going to see what I can do right from the beginning with, you're going to get to know these people really well, and then we're going to interact with other groups and that kind of thing. And so,
Miss Schmidt has different groups she has groups every day, we're in groups, but it's a different group every day.
That's
And she
cognitive
has, like, it's just done, she asks the computer to do it, and it gives her where the names are, and then she'll like mess around with it,
So,
Jose
like,
needs
the
to not be by
opener.
Maria, but it's done. They come in the class, like, after the first week, they come in, they look on the board, they know where they're sitting, or which group they're sitting in.
yeah, and I think that
They do it.
that aspect as a department, like I think different people doing it different ways and sharing can really help. These strategies are great, and it's about how they're implemented and how they're supported that's going to make the difference. Now, Notice and Note also has, I forget what they're called, for nonfiction. These are all, the signposts are for fiction, but there's a whole other set. And so that's a little unwieldy to try to teach that many different things. But going back to reciprocal teaching and questioning the author, it's basically chunking text and having them basically work together to make sense of it. And I think that is something we could all do. So here are some things, and this is our last slide. Basically, metacognitive strategies, it's proven over and over again that if you can teach students those you thinking about your thinking, they're going to be more aware and they are going to be more independent and be better able to apply these good strategies to their own reading. It takes a lot of time to do the direct teaching, especially Notice and Note. You mentioned that already. Anything unfamiliar here? Let me see. I would keep, when I do this again, I am going to do it again this year. Instead of having group discussions, I think I'll have every student end the day by doing like a Notice and Note a signpost journal, And then the next day began with,
Now let's
get out your
discuss.
journal and we're
What
gonna.
did you write down yesterday? Did
Yeah.
you write down anything?
What? You have students like that?
Crazy.
And then, very few, like I said, were able to apply it at the end. But I think that through,
I think that would come if it was more than just,
Yeah, you started.
Yeah.
See, I feel like this is the kind of thing that our whole department could get on board with instead of the way that it's been like, and now we're all gonna do engagement conferences or whatever. Yeah, things that we didn't,
Top down.
like, it would be so much better coming from you in a department meeting like this rather than from someone else and being like, this is what everyone has to do, and then it feels forced.
and I mentioned this before when I was talking about Patty McWhorter, that's what we used to do. We
Yeah.
used to decide as a department what direction we wanted to go, what things we wanted to
I
implement.
think
We
we
had
did
that
that.
power to do it. So the last,
We talked about that, yeah.
I think we've already kind of started doing this, but you know, I've already taken up a lot of your time today, so we're basically done. But any reflections or questions?
I would just add the small group and peer-to-peer interactions are really good for students and their esteem, because our feedback is not very meaningful. You did a great job. They were like, stop talking to me. But when another kid's like, that's a really good point, that means so much. So the more you can get these kids to work together, the better they're all gonna be and more confident.
And it's better for these post-COVID kids to have, even though they're resistant to it, to have, even the kids who are sitting there doing nothing, maybe eventually they'll get into it, but like they are so isolated now that it's just good practice to ask them to do it over and over. And
Yeah, I always tell them how important that skill is in their life, because they're gonna go to job interviews, they're gonna have job evaluations, they're gonna have all of these small meetings, and they're gonna need to figure out how to speak and interrupt people without interrupting people and use eye contact, and that's the most important skill they can come out of our classes with.
Yeah.
So I just think it's great.
That's the reciprocal teaching is nice because it doesn't just teach them how to like approach a word, a text, to break it down, but also how can I offer a unique role to a group?
Yeah.
And I love the idea of rotating roles.
And the roles are good. Like, there used to be one everybody was doing that had like a timekeeper and a
Mhm.
materials
Yeah.
manager, and those are like
Busy.
not much
Right.
intellectual activity
Right.
going on. And
Yeah.
if you're always the materials manager, you're probably figuring out, people have pretty low expectations.
Right.
We all know the scribe is the one who's
Right. I was even thinking about that with like one of the ones, and the first thing was like prediction, and I'm like, if you're the person doing prediction, you just write one thing and then you're.
Well, that's the
Yeah.
thing is that you're with reciprocal teaching, you're breaking text
chunks.
into chunks, and each chunk you switch
A
over.
new.
It's not like you're the same.
Nice.
It is like a constantly
Okay.
changing thing because you want them to be comfortable
Yeah.
with all.
Right, right, right. And it's not so heavy because it's just a little.
Mm-hmm.
Once that's established, you can just insert in different kinds of activities, like, okay, now we're gonna do a highlighting activity. Then, you know, if you're this role, you're this color, and you're
Yep.
just passing around the same text. I think that one's
You
really
could
cool.
also jigsaw it, right? And so
I
then
like
like
jigsaws.
all of the predict people go to this table and like what predictions to see what they
That's kind of neat.
all said, and then all the whatever the different roles are, have them sit together afterwards, and then you know there's a lot
And
of.
it's super flexible. Like
Yeah.
you can just keep building layers and different things like that they could be doing, and essentially that's what I started doing with when we started going into this insane testing mode of like test prep and all that.
Yeah.
I stopped teaching explicitly, like, because it did take a while
There's
for
not
them
time
to get
for it,
used
yeah.
to it, and there wasn't a lot of time for it. I think that it's worth making time for now. But what I started doing was I was coming up with questions that required them to use those same skills, but they were more specific, and it was more like when I had them work in groups, they were talking together about each thing. But I do think it works better when every kid has their own role.
Yeah, I really like it. I think we need to just make this our goal for ELA for this year. All implement it.
Yeah.
Cheers. Yeah, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like, let's do it.
Let's do it.
I mean, like, that's the thing, if we could just choose one thing and all drink the Kool-Aid and try it, even if it fails, we were like, well, we
Yeah.
know it didn't work, 'cause we all did it.
Well,
It's not gonna fail, but even if it did.
yeah, I was gonna say, the results that I had show that it
Right.
didn't fail, but
Right.
it didn't feel like it ever
It
gelled
wasn't a
either.
full trial.
But
Right,
it might, if we did it
So,
nine
Is
through
it a
12,
failure or
yeah.
just a stasis, you know?
exactly.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you all for being here today.